Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: stealing trade secrets, snooping in U.S. military bases, allegedly influencing local politicians. A report says Chinese espionage is growing on U.S. soil. We have an overview. A Chinese intel officer has been running a U.S. defense contract company for 20 years. How did this happen? Nicholas Eftimiades, retired senior intelligence officer, breaks it down.
We have a person, Wang Jie, who has association and contact with very high-level Chinese, including with the Ministry of State Security, and appears all the way up to Xi Jinping.
Chinese app TikTok available again from the Apple and Google app stores. Will the social media get banned, or will it find a U.S. buyer before time runs out? And insiders from China's disease control and detection system told us people have died from bird flu in China. And one of them says some provinces have already built isolation facilities to contain the virus. From stealing trade secrets to influencing local politicians, Chinese espionage on U.S. soil has been on the rise. That's according to a report from the House Committee on Homeland Security released Wednesday. The report said there have been over 60 Chinese espionage cases across 20 states in the past 4 years. Here are a few of the most notable developments. Just last week, authorities indicted Leon Ding, a Chinese national, for allegedly stealing AI secrets from Google. Last December, a New York resident named Chen Jinping pleaded guilty to operating a Chinese police station in New York City's Lower Manhattan. Also in New York, Governor Kathy Hochul's former aide, Linda Sun, was charged with secretly acting as a Chinese agent. According to prosecutors, Sun influenced what Hochul said and didn't say. She also blocked Taiwanese access to the governor while facilitating China's. In Queens, New York, Xu Junwang was convicted of spying for the Chinese Communist Party and gathering information on Chinese dissidents. Heading west to California, authorities accused Mike Sun of spreading political influence on behalf of the Chinese regime in the U.S. Sun helped Eileen Wang win a council seat, serving as her campaign manager in 2022. Sun is Wang's fiancée. Staying in California, Petty Officer Wen Hengzhao was sentenced to 27 months behind bars. That's for transmitting sensitive military information to a Chinese agent. A San Jose resident, Chen Guanggong, was charged with stealing trade secrets. He reportedly stole information on nuclear missile launch sensors. In Los Angeles, Chinese citizen John Chen was sentenced to 20 months in prison. He bribed an IRS official in a plot to target Falun Gong practitioners in the U.S. Falun Gong is a faith group that is severely persecuted inside China. Moving to Florida, a former Verizon engineer, Ping Li, was sentenced to 4 years in prison. That's over spying on dissidents and Falun Gong practitioners for Beijing. In Illinois, a Chinese military member was accused of trying to steal information from a U.S. communications company in order to hand it to entities in China. In Michigan, 5 Chinese nationals were found on a military base with cameras. Prosecutors accused them of making false statements and conspiring to delete photos from their phones. With concerns of Chinese influence on U.S. soil rising, a new Daily Caller report highlights how a Chinese intel officer has been running a U.S. defense contract company for 20 years. The company in question, SNL, supplies parts to both the U.S. military and commercial jets like Boeing. The report goes on to note Wang has ties to a group under the control of China's overseas influence arm, the United Front Work Department. The organization is called the China Overseas Friendship Association. And the intel officer was seen applauding Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping at one of its events in May of 2019. Here to break it all down is Nicholas Eftimiades, retired senior intelligence officer and author of Chinese Intelligence, Operations, and Tactics. Nick Eftimiades, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, jumping straight into this article to begin, how was Wang, who is a Chinese immigrant but also a Chinese intel officer, able to operate his company in the U.S. for 20 years without the likes of the FBI discovering?
Well, This actually falls into the world of counterintelligence. And counterintelligence, they call a wilderness of mirrors, because you don't know what others know even about this situation, right? The only thing we know is we have a person, Wang Jie, who has association and contact with very high-level Chinese, including with the Ministry of State Security, and appears all the way up to Xi Jinping. So we also know that that person is a second or third tier supplier to the Department of Defense, right? That's our knowledge base. Who he knows, who he's telling, we have no idea of who he's friends with. What we do know is that this person has some access to the inner workings of the Defense Department acquisition processes. We know that he's on a Critical Manufacturing Sector Coordinating Council. That's an industry group in support of Homeland Security to promulgate policies to put out to ensure security, providing to U.S. critical infrastructure.
I want to dig into that because, as you mentioned, of course, he was pictured with, the likes of Xi Jinping, Chinese regime leader. He was also pictured with Linda Sun, who was indicted for being a Chinese or foreign agent who worked as an aide for New York Governor Kathy Hochul. Now, given all of those supposed ties, if you will, what security questions does this raise for you? Of course, his lawyer is saying he's not tied to these groups, but didn't deny that he was in the photos with them. So what security questions is that raising for you?
Right. Well, it certainly raises a question on issues of what his access has been to China. Has he been acting on China's behalf? That's certainly a question that, at least inside the counterintelligence mindset, is ongoing. Because he's been seen with senior Chinese leadership, and he's parts of organizations that Xi Jinping himself has defined as his magic weapon, against the West.
Well, Nick Eftimiades, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks very much. I appreciate being here.
Google and Apple restored TikTok to their app stores Thursday night, despite the platform's uncertain future in the U.S. After taking office, President Trump issued an executive order delaying the U.S. ban on TikTok, giving the app more time to find a U.S. buyer. But that delay is set to expire in less than 2 months.
TikTok is facing an uncertain future. That's as President Trump's pause on a law that could ban the app is nearing its end.
Do you have an update on the TikTok negotiations?
Yeah, we have a lot of people.
Timeline's running out.
Well, I have 90 days from about 2 weeks ago, right? And I'm sure it can be extended, but let's see. I don't think you'll need to. We have a lot of people interested in TikTok, and I hope to be able to make a deal. So I'm going to make it worthwhile for China to do it.
Soon after Trump's inauguration, he put a 75-day pause on the law that forces TikTok to divest from its Chinese parent company or be banned in the U.S. Now, during this time, Trump's negotiating a sale of TikTok. Earlier in the week, Trump signed an executive order that develops a government-owned investment fund. Among many things, that fund would allow the U.S. to profit off of TikTok if it's sold to an American buyer.
We're going to be doing something perhaps with TikTok, and perhaps not. If we make the right deal, we'll do it. Otherwise, we won't. But I have the right to do that, and we might put that in the sovereign wealth fund, whatever we make, or if we do a partnership with very wealthy people.
TikTok has faced scrutiny over national security and data privacy concerns, as Chinese law requires TikTok and all other companies in China to hand over data to the regime upon request. Now, we're also seeing lawmakers working to ban AI chatbot DeepSeek, which is owned by a Chinese company. DeepSeek self-censors information about China's human rights abuses. Try searching, for example, the Tiananmen Square massacre or Chinese leader Xi Jinping's name on it, and it comes up with the same results, that it cannot answer that question and ask something else. That's why Democratic Congressman Josh Gottheimer and Republican Congressman Darren LaHood have introduced legislation to ban DeepSeek from government devices.
The CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, has one intention. They're our number one adversary, and their intention is to spew disinformation and to ensure that our democracy's best days are behind us, not ahead of us. Obviously, we believe we've got to do everything we can to protect our country, and especially to ensure that the Chinese Communist Party is not using disinformation or collecting data on Americans to try to undermine our country. Both in the case of DeepSeek is where we see concerns. I think we both saw that in the case of TikTok, and I think it's overwhelming and clear.
As the March deadline for the extension on TikTok nears, questions remain on the future of the Chinese-owned app. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
We have more updates on the H5N1 virus situation inside China. H5N1 is a strain of avian influenza, bird flu. It largely infects poultry birds, with some cases in humans. An employee of China's Disease Detection and Control System told NTD that people have died from H5N1 bird flu in northern China's Shanxi province, though the number of the deaths is difficult to calculate due to the Chinese regime's strict censorship. Another person working for a face mask manufacturer in China told us that isolation facilities have been built in multiple provinces. He previously said that he has seen at least 100 H5N1 cases. Besides local reports, official actions are also being taken. Let's zoom in on one district in Shanxi. Based on the official website of the area's local CDC, officials started an assessment last month to track human infections of avian flu. It's worth noting that the Chinese CDC's reports strongly contrast with what insiders are telling us. As of now, the Chinese state-owned agency said there are no cases of H5N1 bird flu in the country. We will keep you updated as the situation develops. Shifting back to the U.S., Customs and Border Patrol seized more than 160,000 counterfeit forever stamps from China. The parcels were stopped at the Chicago International Mail Branch.
Officers discovered the fakes because of their very low invoice value and routing. They were all coming from China. If real, the value would be over $118,000.
President Trump says he's looking to talk with Chinese leader Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin on reducing the global nuclear threat. On Thursday, Trump stated that denuclearization is one of his goals for his second term. This builds on his first-term efforts to urge countries to limit their nuclear arsenals. While China showed openness and Russia agreed at the time, the COVID-19 lockdown caused setbacks. According to the Arms Control Association, Russia currently possesses more than 5,500 warheads, with the U.S. trailing behind. China has roughly 600 nuclear warheads. Trump plans to revisit the issue by first speaking with Xi and Putin, possibly with a trilateral meeting later on. Coming up, a balancing act for President Donald Trump. He met with India's Prime Minister Modi as Washington works to counter the Chinese regime and boost ties with India, one of America's most important allies in Asia. If the Chinese Communist Party launches a blockade around Taiwan, how would the U.S. and allied nations respond?
I think that the Trump administration probably would stick its neck out to defend Taiwan.
And China is cozying up to a small Pacific island nation, especially when it comes to marine infrastructure. What's in it for Beijing, and how could it impact the U.S.? Details in just a minute here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited President Trump at the White House on Thursday. At the top of their agenda, trade, defense cooperation, and China's rising aggression in the Indo-Pacific. NTD's Sam Wong has the details.
Forging ties in the face of an increasingly assertive China, President Trump on Thursday hosted Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the White House. The two discussed Trump's reciprocal tariffs and plans to boost U.S. defense and energy sales to India.
They're going to be purchasing a lot of our oil and gas. We have more oil and gas than any other country in the world by far. It's very important that we remain united as countries. We're friends and we're going to stay that way.
The White House has suggested a new defense framework between the U.S. and India. As part of the deal, India will ramp up purchases of American technology, and the U.S. will prioritize India as a main importer of American natural resources. The two nations zoomed in on semiconductors, critical minerals, and other supply chain issues. These are areas that China is seeking to dominate.
Starting this year, we'll be increasing military sales to India by many billions of dollars. We're also paving the way to ultimately provide India with the F-35 stealth fighters.
Earlier on Thursday, Modi also met with tech billionaire Elon Musk and White House National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Musk has long been looking to bring Starlink to India, but so far to no avail. Though Trump often criticizes India over issues like illegal immigration and its trade deficit with the U.S., the two leaders have maintained a cordial relationship in public. Now the administration says it's hoping to announce a fair trade deal for both countries.
On tariffs, are you concerned that the countries that would be most affected, like India, would just shift their trading to China?
No, I'm not concerned about anything, really. I mean, I'm just doing what's fair.
Disputes aside, the United States remains India's top trading partner. The nation has spent billions on American defense imports in recent years. Geopolitically, India is a member of the Quad Alliance, a strategic partnership with the U.S., Japan, and Australia. The coalition shares common concerns about China's malign activities in the Indo-Pacific region. Sam Wang, NTD News, Washington, D.C.
One of the critical issues facing U.S.-China relations is Taiwan. The Chinese Communist Party has pledged to take the island under control by force if necessary. If Beijing attempted to take over the island, how would the U.S. respond? We spoke with retired Marine Colonel Grant Newsham for his take. He's a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy. Grant Newsham, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
I'm glad to be here.
From the military perspective, Taiwan is part of what's known as the first silent chain, which blocks the deep sea submarines of China's from entering the Pacific Ocean that could then hit the continental U.S. Given that, though, some are, contemplating that if the Chinese Communist Party were to launch a blockade or a slow-moving quarantine of the island, the U.S. wouldn't, or allied nations wouldn't be so fast to respond, as some are pointing to the response to Ukraine, which is a sovereign nation, whereas, Taiwan only has about a dozen countries that diplomatically recognize it. How do you view that? If there was a slow-moving blockade or a quarantine around Taiwan, what would that kind of response look like?
Nobody quite knows. I think people know what the possibilities are. You could have a coalition led by the United States that goes all in to defend Taiwan and to sort of push through supplies and the wherewithal to survive and dare the Chinese to attack them. Or you could have an administration that just says, well, this isn't worth the risk of a war in this case, and sort of back off and allow the Chinese to strangle Taiwan. Nobody quite knows, and I don't think the People's Republic of China knows exactly what the U.S. response would be. I think that the Trump administration probably would stick its neck out to defend Taiwan in the event that the Chinese do pressure it in the way that you've described. Although I do note that some people are being hired for positions in the administration, in the Department of Defense in particular, who don't seem to think that Taiwan is all that valuable and that we should do anything to avoid a war with China. I've even heard one person who's rumored for a spot say that it wasn't worth defending Taiwan because we might lose and that would be catastrophic, therefore let it go. It is surprising, some of the people that seem to be getting hired for these positions. But if you look at Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, and Pete Hegseth in Department of Defense, these people are very clear about the threat from China and the importance of Taiwan, but you have to look at the other people in an administration. So the answer I would give is we just don't know. But I think Xi Jinping would be rolling the dice if he were to try to go after Taiwan. And once a war starts, it never quite ends up the way anybody thinks it would.
Now, speaking of this being a global conflict, there's also been maybe focus on that region where you see Japan increasing its defense spending past the more pacifist phase it had after World War II. You actually have a chapter in Matt Pottinger's book, The Boiling Moat, where you talk about Japan and some officials inside Japan saying that the Taiwan issue is actually a Japanese issue and that Japan can't just wait for the U.S. Talk to us about that and what the Japan-U.S. relationship means for that region.
Well, in Japan, there is a phrase you will hear a lot, which is Taiwan's defense is Japan's defense. You'll hear that all the time. And there's plenty of Japanese in the military and the political class who do believe that. There's others, just like in the United States, however, who see the risk of war as just being too much. And the idea that we have to keep economic ties intact, and therefore it's really not worth defending Taiwan. So you get the Japanese military is doing the best it can. It's not doing everything it can do, but it's doing the best it can for now to try and get ready for a fight. I don't believe, however, that it's ready. For example, it doesn't have adequate war stocks, necessary ammunition, hardware, casualty handling facilities. It doesn't have a good reserve system. And perhaps doesn't even have the plans to respond to a fight on Taiwan. Also, the ability of the Japanese military to operate with the United States forces is very limited. And considering how many decades the defense alliance has been in place, it's scandalous. The exception.
Well, Grant Newsham, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks very much. Glad to be here.
China's premier is eyeing a small nation in the Pacific, the Cook Islands. He met with the country's leader Friday in China and zeroed in on marine infrastructure during their talks on cooperation.
It's a familiar pattern the Chinese regime has used to grow influence in the Pacific region and worries larger Pacific players like Australia and New Zealand. Brown's trip to China is the first by a leader of the small South Pacific nation in a decade. Officials in New Zealand say the Cook Islands did not properly communicate about the visit or its agreements. The Cook Islands has a special political relationship with New Zealand, and its inhabitants are considered New Zealand citizens.
For the United States, the Pacific Island nations are of great strategic importance, especially in countering the Chinese Communist Party's ambition to expand its global influence. That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you soon.